The air in the training hall was thick with tension. Around the room, aliens of every shape and size were lined up, their attention focused on the center of the space where the instructor stood. He was a tall, imposing figure with scales that shimmered under the lights, and his voice was deep, booming as he spoke. "Today, we test our strength, our discipline, and our ability to learn," the instructor announced. His eyes swept over the room, landing on each cadet, their faces a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. But then his gaze stopped. He had seen the girl. She was standing off to the side, separate from the group. A human, a Death Worlder. Her presence was almost an anomaly in this place, a small, fragile-looking thing compared to the towering aliens around her. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her posture straight, and her eyes were focused, almost too focused. As though she had already decided she would survive this. Her name was Sarah. But to the rest of them, she was just the human, the odd one out. The instructor's eyes narrowed. He had heard of her reputation before. A human, surviving in a universe full of deadly species, had to be something special. But what could she possibly bring to the table in a world where strength and power ruled above all else? He was about to find out. "Sarah, step forward," the instructor called out, his voice dripping with a challenge. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. For a brief moment, Sarah hesitated. The aliens around her might have been strong, but they were not the ones she feared. It was the instructor who would push her limits. She knew that. She had studied his past, the way he had broken cadets without even trying, bending them to his will. The kind of fearsome being who had never been challenged. But she wasn't just any cadet. She was a Death Worlder. Sarah stepped into the center of the room, her eyes locking with the instructor's. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the judgment, the expectation. But she didn't blink. "Prepare yourself," the instructor said, his tone now serious. "The first test will be strength. I want to see how well you can take a hit." The words were simple. They sounded simple. But Sarah knew better. It wasn't just about strength. It was about survival. In her world, every moment was a test. Every second was a challenge. She had faced worse than anything this instructor could throw at her. The instructor moved in fast, his arms swinging with practiced ease. Each strike meant to break her, to test her limits. His first punch landed a solid blow to Sarah's nose. There was a sickening crack as her nose snapped, blood instantly pouring down her face. But instead of stumbling backward, Sarah's body locked, and with sheer force of will, she stood her ground. The instructor's eyes widened in brief surprise. Most cadets would have fallen, crumbled, maybe even cried out in pain, but not Sarah. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Sarah wiped the blood from her face with a casual swipe of her hand, her eyes never leaving the instructor. A slow, determined grin spread across her face. In that moment, the instructor knew this wouldn't be as easy as he had hoped. The cadets watched with bated breath, unsure what to expect. Was she going to fight back? Was she even capable of it? Without warning, Sarah moved. Her speed was almost unnatural. She darted forward, quicker than anyone could have anticipated. And before the instructor could react, her hand was already gripping his arm. Her fingers twisted, using the full force of her body, and with a sharp snap, his arm broke. The sound echoed through the hall, filling the silence like a loud crack of thunder. The instructor gasped in shock, his face contorted in pain. He had underestimated her. He had thought she would break, that she would fall like the others. But no, the human this Death Worlder had fought back, and with terrifying strength. The room was still for a long moment. Sarah stood there, breathing heavily, her bloodied nose a stark contrast to the calm determination in her eyes. She had done it. In less than 30 seconds, she had turned the tables. The instructor stumbled back. clutching his arm, his face now pale with disbelief. This was not how he had planned this to go. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile nothing compared to the alien warriors he had trained for years. But this girl? She was different. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're strong," he said quietly, his voice tinged with an unwilling respect. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She wasn't finished proving herself. She wiped the last of the blood from her face and straightened up, her gaze still locked on the instructor. "I'm just getting started." The silence in the hall was deafening. Every alien in the room was frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had all seen Sarah, the human, break the instructor's arm as easily as snapping a twig. And the instructor, the one who was supposed to be the best of them, the one who had dominated every cadet he had ever faced. He had been taken down by a human, and in less than 30 seconds, the instructor, still clutching his arm, took a shaky step backward. His face was a mixture of pain, surprise, and something else, something unfamiliar, fear. "Get back in position," he growled, trying to regain his composure. His voice was low, though his words lacked the usual authority. But Sarah stood there, her posture unshaken, eyes still locked on him. Blood dripped from her nose, but she barely seemed to notice it. Her gaze was cold, calculating. She wasn't just playing the part of a cadet anymore. She was something else. Something stronger than anything they had ever seen. The other cadets remained still, unsure of what to do. They had all heard stories about Deathworlders, but none of them had ever met one. None of them had seen what a true Deathworlder could do. They had heard the whispers the humans were resilient, adaptable, relentless, but now they were witnessing it firsthand. The instructor straightened up, still clutching his arm, and with a forced grunt, he cracked his knuckles, his eyes narrowing into a glare. He wasn't going to let a single cadet outshine him. Not even this human. "Fine," he spat, his voice now carrying the full weight of his anger. "We'll do this the hard way." Without warning, the instructor lunged at Sarah once more, his movements fast, brutal, and precise. This time, he aimed for her midsection, hoping to catch her off guard. But Sarah was ready. Her reaction was swift, instinctual. She sidestepped, his attack ducking under his arm, and before the instructor could adjust, her elbow shot up into his rib cage with a sickening crunch. The instructor's breath caught in his throat, and he staggered back, his expression one of pure disbelief. He hadn't expected this kind of response from someone so small, so fragile. "Is that all you've got?" Sarah's voice was calm, even taunting. Her eyes were still cold, her stance steady. The instructor staggered, clutching his ribs, trying to push through the pain. He glared at Sarah, hatred burning in his eyes. "You're nothing but a freak," he growled, his voice low but full of venom. The room was still again, only the sound of Sarah's breathing and the instructor's labored gasps filling the air. The other cadets didn't know what to make of this. Some of them had begun to doubt their own abilities. If Sarah could take down the instructor, what did that mean for them? "I'm not a freak," Sarah said, her tone hard, her voice cutting through the silence. "I'm a survivor. And I'm here to prove that I belong." The instructor took another step toward her, his eyes burning with fury. He was no longer thinking clearly. His pride had been wounded, and he wouldn't let a human, especially a Deathworlder, humiliate him like this. His alien strength, his years of experience were supposed to have been enough. Sarah didn't wait for him to strike first this time. She moved faster than the instructor could react, her fists flying. The first punch slammed into his jaw, causing his head to snap back. But Sarah didn't stop. She was a blur, faster than the aliens around her could track. Each strike precise and deadly. Another hit landed on his shoulder, dislocating it with an audible pop. The instructor let out a roar of pain, but Sarah didn't flinch. She continued her assault, using every bit of her strength, every ounce of her survival instincts. The instructor had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. Within seconds, the instructor was on the ground, gasping for air, his body broken and battered. Sarah stood over him, her breathing steady but heavy, her body covered in blood, both hers and his. She had done what no one thought possible. She had brought the instructor to his knees. The room was silent, the cadets too stunned to even move. Sarah wiped the blood from her face, her eyes still cold, but her posture relaxed, her confidence evident. She had one. The instructor groaned from the ground, his body trembling with pain. "You're not human," he spat, his voice barely a whisper. No human could do this. Sarah's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "I told you. I'm a survivor." She turned her back on him, her eyes scanning the room full of alien cadets. "Anyone else want to test me?" she asked, her voice carrying across the hall. The room was still. No one moved. The challenge had been thrown down, but no one was brave enough to answer it. The room remained eerily quiet, the silence hanging heavily in the air like a dense fog. Sarah stood tall, her bloodied hands at her sides, her nose still dripping crimson. The instructor, now on the ground and clutching. His broken body was left with nothing but pain and humiliation. The alien cadets remained frozen in place, their eyes wide and unsure, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily on their shoulders. Some of them were still trying to process the fact that a human Death Worlder had just defeated the instructor with ease. No one had expected it. Not like this. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, one of the cadets, the largest of the group, hulking figure with 4 muscular arms, took a hesitant step forward. His voice rumbled. Low and uncertain, "Is she really one of us now?" He asked, his gaze flicking from Sarah to the instructor, who was still on the floor, gasping for air. Sarah's eyes shifted toward him. Her expression remained calm, but her stance shifted slightly, as if preparing for something else. Something worse. The cadet's questions seemed to hang in the air, unanswered for a brief moment. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The fight spoke for itself. She had proven that she wasn't just some weakling. She was a warrior there. Equal. But she wasn't sure if that was enough. She wiped the blood from her nose again and flicked it onto the floor. "I don't need your acceptance," she said simply. Her voice was low, firm. "I'm here to survive. If you can't keep up, that's your problem, not mine." The cadet blinked, his confusion slowly replaced by a grudging respect. He wasn't used to humans talking like that, but there was no denying that Sarah's actions had spoken louder than words ever could at that moment. The instructor finally managed to push himself up, his face twisted in agony. He glared at Sarah, still unable to comprehend how she had done what she had done. You should have stayed in your place," the instructor growled, his voice ragged. "You think this is over? You think I won't come after you?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I don't care about your threats. You're the one who underestimated me, and that's your mistake." The instructor's lips curled into a painful grin. "You're wrong, human. You've provoked me. And now you'll regret it." Without warning, he lunged at her again, using his remaining arm to swipe at her with the speed of a predator. His rage clouded his judgment, and his movements were desperate, uncontrolled. But Sarah was ready. With a fluid motion, she sidestepped him, dodging the attack with the precision of someone who had been in 100 fights. In the same motion, her foot snapped out, kicking the instructor's injured leg out from under him. He hit the ground with a loud thud, unable to get back up. Sarah stood over him again, her chest rising and falling with each breath. "You're done," she said, her voice cold. "Stay down." The instructor glared up at her, his eyes full of venom. But he knew better than to challenge her further. He had already lost. The room was silent, and no one moved. The cadets had witnessed it all. The human had bested the instructor. There was no denying it anymore. She was not just a survivor, she was a force to be reckoned with. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to look around the room. The cadets were no longer unsure. They weren't afraid of her, they were respecting her. She had earned that. But Sarah wasn't here for respect. She wasn't here for admiration. She was here because she had a goal to survive in this deadly world of aliens, to prove she was just as capable as any of them, and to earn her place among them. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, her eyes scanning the room. The cadets stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to say something. Anything. But Sarah was done speaking for now. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to fight. And as long as she could keep proving herself, she knew she would earn her place. Finally, Sarah turned and began to walk away, her footsteps steady and sure. "I'll be in the next training session," she called over her shoulder, her voice unwavering. "If any of you think you can do better than him, step up. If not, stay out of my way." The cadets stood there for a long time, unsure of how to react. But Sarah was already gone, leaving them with nothing but the memory of what they had just witnessed. The instructor remained on the ground, clutching his broken arm, his breath shallow and labored. He was defeated, humiliated, and as he stared at the floor, he realized something. He had underestimated her, and now he would have to live with the consequences. The days that followed Sarah's explosive defeat of the instructor were tense. The once orderly training hall had become a battlefield of sorts, with cadets constantly eyeing one another, unsure who to trust. No one expected a human, especially a Deathworlder, to dominate the way Sarah had. She had shattered more than just bones, she had shattered their understanding of what it meant to be strong. Sarah's reputation spread quickly through the ranks. Whispers filled the halls, echoing off the metal walls of the station, and no matter where she went, she could feel the stares, the eyes that watched her every move. The cadets were no longer merely curious about her. They were watching her for weakness. But Sarah didn't give them the satisfaction. She walked through the halls with her head high, her focus sharper than ever. She wasn't here to make friends. Training had only gotten harder, but Sarah didn't mind. She had survived far worse in her life, and this was nothing compared to the dangers of her own planet. Still, there was something about the way the other cadets looked at her that nagged at the back of her mind. One morning, during a grueling physical test, she caught sight of the four-armed cadet, the one who had spoken up after her first fight with the instructor. He was standing at the edge of the training area, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but the way he observed her made Sarah uneasy. The instructor had barely recovered, but he had returned to the training sessions, nursing his wounded pride. The second he saw Sarah step onto the mat for her next challenge, he smirked. His arm still hung awkwardly at his side, but his eyes were cold. "Let's see if you're just lucky, Deathworlder," he sneered. Sarah didn't even flinch. The words didn't bother her anymore. She was used to the contempt that came with being an outsider. What bothered her was that this time, the instructor wasn't alone. A few cadets had gathered around, watching intently. They were expecting her to fail. They were waiting for her to fall. The challenge was simple: survive against multiple opponents for 5 minutes. The instructor had handpicked a few of the strongest cadets in the group to test her. Ones that had earned their reputation. Sarah was alone. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the pressure mounting. But Sarah knew this was just another test, another hurdle to overcome. The first cadet, the massive four-armed one, charged at her with surprising speed. He swung his massive fists in her direction, each punch capable of crushing her skull. But Sarah had learned a long time ago how to handle opponents bigger than her. She ducked under the first swing, dodged the second, and with a swift movement, grabbed his arm. Using his own momentum, she twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. His grunt of pain echoed through the hall as he struggled to break free. But Sarah held him in place, her grip tightening with each passing second. The room was silent. "Is that all you've got?" she asked, her voice low but cutting through the tension like a blade. The cadets exchanged uncomfortable glances, and the instructor's face darkened. He hadn't expected her to take down one of his strongest cadets so easily. But Sarah wasn't done yet. The next cadet came at her from the side, his attack coming in fast. This one was smaller, quicker. He aimed a high kick at her head, trying to catch her off guard, but Sarah saw it coming. She shifted her weight and caught his foot mid-air. Before he could react, she twisted his leg in the opposite direction, sending him sprawling to the floor with a sharp crack. The instructor's eyes narrowed in frustration. Sarah had already neutralized two of his strongest cadets, but there was still one more to go. The third cadet was a tall reptilian alien with scales that gleamed under the harsh lights. He was faster than the others and far more agile. He darted forward, trying to close the distance between them before Sarah could react. But she was ready. Her body moved like fluid, instinctively dodging his strikes and countering with precise, controlled moves. For every strike he made, Sarah had an answer. Her movements were sharp and unforgiving, and within moments, she had him on the floor, pinned beneath her, his breath escaping in rapid, panicked gasps. The room had gone completely silent by now. Sarah stood, her chest rising and falling, but her expression was unchanged. The cadets around her had been completely outclassed. She hadn't just beaten them, she had dismantled them. The instructor's face was twisted with rage. He stepped forward, his voice low and filled with venom. "You think you've proven something?" he spat. "You've only humiliated them. You've made them look like fools." Sarah turned slowly to face him, her eyes hard, her body still. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said, her voice quiet but full of a cold, dangerous edge. "But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You want me to fail? You want me to break? I don't think you'll get that from me." For a moment, the instructor's gaze locked onto hers. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear his shallow breathing. Finally, the instructor straightened, his expression unreadable. "You've earned your place." "For now," he muttered, before turning on his heel and walking away, his cadets trailing behind him. Sarah stood still, her body humming with the adrenaline of the fight. She had done what no one thought possible. She had proven herself again as she made her way off the mat. The four-armed cadet who had been first to challenge her approached. His eyes were filled with something new, respect, maybe even a hint of fear. "You really are something else," he said, his voice low but not mocking. "I'll give you that." Sarah looked at him for a moment before nodding once. "I'm here to survive. If you want to be a part of that, you'd better keep up." He said nothing, just turned and walked away. But Sarah could see the change in him and in the others too. She wasn't just a cadet now. She was something more, something that no one could ignore. The days after Sarah's victory in the training hall were a blur of whispers and uncertain glances. The instructor was not the only one who had been shaken by her. The other cadets, who had once been certain they could dominate her, now saw her in a different light. She was no longer just the human. She was a force to be reckoned with. But for Sarah, the challenges were far from over. Every day brought a new test, a new trial, and she had to keep proving herself, not just to the cadets, but to herself. She was used to surviving, but survival on this station was a different beast altogether. The alien species around her, with their superior strength, intelligence, and technology, had a way of pushing her to the limit. And it was clear to her that no matter how much she succeeded, they would always be looking for a reason to bring her down. It was early one morning when the next test was announced. The cadets were summoned to the training hall for a new kind of challenge: combat with live weapons. The instructor stood at the front of the room, his arms still in a sling from their previous encounter, but his face was calm, almost emotionless. Behind him, a rack of weapons glinted under the harsh overhead lights. There were energy blades, plasma rifles, and other tools of war, weapons that Sarah had never seen before, let alone used. "Today, we test your ability to fight with the weapons of this galaxy," the instructor said, his voice cold but tinged with something darker. "You'll face off with one another, and there are no rules, no mercy." The cadets murmured in excitement, but Sarah remained still, her face unreadable. She had never fought with weapons like these before, but she knew how to handle herself. She had fought with knives, with guns, with everything she could get her hands on back home. This wouldn't be any different. "Sarah," the instructor's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're first." The words hit her like a punch. To the gut, she knew he was testing her, pushing her further. He wasn't going to give her any breaks. But Sarah wasn't about to back down. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the weapon rack. She didn't hesitate, her hand reaching for a long energy blade. It hummed softly as she grasped it, feeling the weight in her hand. This would be a challenge, but she was ready. The feeling of the weapon in her grip was oddly comforting. Something about it felt right across the room. Her opponent stood ready. It was the reptilian alien, the one who had been knocked out in their previous training session. He was glaring at her, his eyes full of resentment. He had failed once before, but now he had the chance to redeem himself. This time, he wasn't going to make the same mistake. The instructor nodded, signaling that the fight was about to begin. The room grew tense, and the cadets fell silent. Watching with bated breath, with a sharp, commanding motion, the instructor called out, "Begin." In an instant, the reptilian cadet moved. His speed was unbelievable, faster than anything Sarah had faced before. He swung his energy blade with deadly precision, aiming for her head. Sarah reacted on pure instinct, ducking low and sidestepping the strike. The weapon buzzed past her ear, leaving a trail of blue light in its wake. But Sarah didn't stop. She was already in motion, her body following the rhythm of the fight. She slashed upward with her energy blade, meeting his with a clash of lights. The force behind the blow sent a jolt of electricity through her arm, but she held firm, twisting her wrist and pushing him back. The cadet snarled, furious at being caught off guard. He swung again, this time aiming at her torso. Sarah twisted her body, narrowly dodging the attack, her blade slashing across his chest in a fluid motion. The alien let out a hiss of pain, but he didn't back down. He came at her with renewed fury, his strikes faster, more vicious. It was clear he was fighting for more than just the win. He was fighting for his pride. Sarah wasn't just fighting to win. She was fighting to survive. Every strike was calculated, each move deliberate. She had no time to waste. Her every instinct screamed at her to be faster, to strike harder, to push him back. She dodged and weaved, her eyes constantly scanning. For the next attack, the next opportunity, the reptilian cadet lunged, aiming for her midsection, but Sarah had already anticipated the move. She stepped back, using her momentum to bring the blade down on his arm. The sound of sizzling energy filled the air as his weapon was knocked out of his grasp, the blade sparking and flickering as it hit the floor. He roared in fury, but Sarah wasn't done. She moved in, her blade raised, but the cadet was quick. He tried to kick her, his talon-covered feet aiming for her chest. The blow connected, sending her stumbling back, but Sarah quickly regained her footing. Enough. The instructor's voice cut through the air like a whip, and the room fell silent. Sarah and the reptilian cadets stood facing each other, panting, blood dripping from small cuts on both their bodies. The instructor looked from one to the other, his expression unreadable. "You've proven yourself human," he said, his voice low but tinged with reluctant respect. "But you are still far from being one of us." Sarah didn't respond. She had already won the fight, and she knew it. It didn't matter what the instructor thought. She wasn't here to be part of their group. She was here to survive, and that meant outlasting every challenge they threw at her. She turned and walked off the training mat, ignoring the cadets' gazes as she passed. They watched her in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of this human who had not only survived, but thrived in their world. The days following Sarah's fight with the reptilian cadet were marked by an eerie silence. The atmosphere in the training hall had shifted, a palpable tension hanging in the air. The other cadets, once so sure of their superiority, now looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and wariness. Even the instructor, who had been so eager to break her, seemed to hold back, watching her with a calculating eye. But Sarah didn't care about the looks or the whispers. She didn't need their approval. She was here for one reason only: survival. After the fight, the instructor had given her a brief nod, acknowledging her skill in combat. But it had been far from the praise Sarah was hoping for. It was cold, distant, professional even. He was a teacher, a warrior, and to him, what Sarah had done was simply the bare minimum to prove she could survive in his world. She wasn't bothered by it. In fact, she expected no less. This station, these aliens, they weren't here to make her feel good about herself. They were here to test her, to break her, to see if she could handle what it meant to live in this galaxy. The days dragged on, with more grueling physical tests, mock battles, and survival simulations. The stakes were higher, and each test felt more impossible than the last. Yet, each time, Sarah kept proving herself. She survived them all. She was the Death Worlder, the anomaly, the one no one understood, the one they couldn't defeat. And in the background, the alien cadets were growing more and more frustrated. The giant four-armed cadet, the one who had been first to challenge her, watched her closely every day. His eyes narrowed whenever she performed better than him. And it was clear that he was waiting for his chance to take her down. But Sarah wasn't just fighting to prove herself to them. She was fighting for something much more important: her own sense of purpose. She had been thrown into this world without any warning, without a choice. She had no allies, no friends, just her own instincts to guide her, and she would survive. She would survive. The day of the next test arrived without warning, a sudden and jarring interruption to the usual routine. The instructor's voice boomed over the loudspeakers in the barracks. All cadets report to the central arena immediately for the final survival challenge. Weapons are authorized. Failure will result in immediate expulsion from the training program. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The final survival challenge. It was a test unlike any she had faced before. The rules were simple: survive, but the conditions were brutal. The arena was a place where cadets were pitted against each other, and the instructor had the final say over who survived. There was no time limit. There was no mercy. She grabbed her gear and headed straight to the arena, her mind already racing. She had faced every kind of battle: hand-to-hand combat, strategy games, even simulated alien predators. But this was different. This was real. Real stakes, real danger, and the possibility of failure. As she entered the arena, the sounds of the cadets preparing for the test filled the air. Weapons clattered against the ground, and hushed voices whispered in the corners of the room. The instructor stood at the center, arms crossed, watching the cadets with an almost unsettling calmness. Sarah's eyes scanned the arena. It was large, about the size of a small city block. Tall walls surrounded it, with various obstacles scattered across the ground. Barrels, wreckage, high platforms. Everything was designed for combat, for evasion, for survival. Today, the instructor said, his voice low, "You will face one another. The last cadet standing wins. No rules, no mercy. This is the final test." The words hung heavy in the air, and Sarah could feel the tension grow. She wasn't sure who the instructor was testing more, the cadets or herself. One by one, the cadets stepped forward, their weapons in hand, their eyes locked on Sarah. The four-armed cadet was the first to approach her. His expression was different. Now calmer, more focused. But there was something in his eyes that Sarah recognized. Rage. "You've humiliated me," he said, his voice cold, but not without a hint of respect. "I've trained for this. You won't walk away from this unscathed." Sarah didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. She wasn't here for petty grudges. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here to survive. Without warning, the instructor's voice rang out. "Begin." The moment the words were spoken, chaos erupted. The four-armed cadet lunged at Sarah, his massive fists swinging. But Sarah had already anticipated his move. She ducked, feeling the air rush past her as his arm barely missed her. Before he could recover, she sprang forward, using her momentum to grab his arm and twist it behind his back. But he wasn't done. In one swift movement, he managed to break free, turning to face her. He was angry now, desperate. And his attacks grew more reckless. Sarah blocked his strikes, each blow forcing her to react faster, to think quicker. His power was overwhelming. But Sarah had something he didn't: adaptability. The more she fought, the more she learned about him. She knew where his weaknesses were, how he moved. And finally, with a quick twist of her body, she brought him to the ground again, pinning him for the second time. But before she could secure him completely, a new challenger entered the fray. The reptilian cadet, the one she had fought in previous tests, charged at Sarah from the side, his sharp claws raised and ready to strike. He wasn't going to let Sarah have the upper hand again. He had learned from his previous defeat, and now he was faster, more precise. Sarah barely had time to react. The reptilian cadet slashed at her side, his claws leaving deep, painful gashes. The pain flared, but Sarah pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. With a growl, she grabbed his wrist mid-swing, twisting his arm and using his own momentum to throw him to the ground. She didn't give him the chance to recover. Her energy blade appeared in her hand, and with one quick movement, she knocked the weapon from his grasp, sending it skittering across the arena floor. The reptilian cadet snarled, but he didn't get up. He had been defeated again. Sarah stood over him, breathing heavily, her body covered in sweat and blood. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. The arena was quiet now. Her eyes scanned the room, the remaining cadets still standing, watching her carefully. She had defeated two of the strongest warriors here, but the final test wasn't over. There were still others who would come for her. Still others who would try to bring her down, and she would face them all. The dust of the arena still hung in the air as Sarah stood over her defeated opponents, her chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The remaining cadets watched her, and for the first time, there was no contempt in their eyes. There was no doubt. Only a quiet understanding. But the fight wasn't over yet. Her wounds burned from the cuts the reptilian cadet had left on her, and blood mixed with sweat streaking down her face. But Sarah didn't let it distract her. She had proven herself over and over. But this final challenge, the one that would determine everything, was just beginning. She wiped the blood from her eyes, scanning the arena for the next threat. The instructor's voice cut through the silence, cold and emotionless. Only one cadet remained standing. "You'll have your final test now." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her energy blade. She was ready for whatever was next. But the words left her with a chill. There was something in the instructor's voice that didn't sit right with her. She had already fought the strongest cadets here. What could possibly be left to test her? It didn't take long for her answer to arrive. The door at the far side of the arena hissed open, and the last remaining cadet emerged. It wasn't one of the other trainees she had fought. It was someone new, someone bigger, stronger, someone who looked like they could crush a planet with their bare hands. The creature that entered the arena was massive, its skin covered in thick, jagged scales that shimmered in the harsh light of the arena. Its eyes were a cold, glowing yellow, and it towered over Sarah. It was more than an alien. It was a predator, built for destruction. Sarah's breath hitched in her chest. She had fought fierce opponents before, but this one felt different. Its presence was overwhelming, and for the first time, Sarah's instincts screamed at her to run, but she didn't. She wouldn't. The creature bared its fangs, letting out a deep, guttural growl. The cadets in the stands watched eagerly, knowing exactly who this was. The beast was an elite warrior, an alien fighter trained in the art of war. It had never been defeated, and now it was here to finish what Sarah had started. "This is your final test," the instructor called from the side, his voice devoid of emotion. "Survive this, and you prove you belong. Fail, and you're nothing more than a casualty of this station." The creature lunged at Sarah with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. It was almost too fast for her to follow, but Sarah's training kicked in. She sidestepped, barely avoiding the deadly swipe, her energy blade raised in a defensive stance. The fight had begun. The beast's eyes locked onto hers, its movements quick and relentless. It attacked again, slashing down with its claws, but Sarah was ready this time. She used her blade to deflect the blow, the force vibrating through her body. She winced, but she didn't falter. This was what she had been trained for. She had to stay focused. The creature was relentless, its attacks coming faster, more brutal. Sarah ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow that would have shattered her ribs. She wasn't fast enough to dodge every strike, though. She felt the sting of its claws across her arm, a deep gash that burned with pain. But she pushed through it. Every time the creature attacked, she learned more. It was strong, faster than any of the other cadets, and its strikes were unyielding. But Sarah was resilient. She had survived the worst her home planet had thrown at her. She could survive this. She lashed out with her energy blade, aiming for its exposed side, but the creature swatted her attack aside like it was nothing. It roared in fury, and Sarah staggered back. The fight was growing harder. She could feel her strength fading with each passing moment, her wounds starting to take their toll. But she wasn't done. The creature made a final charge, its claws aimed at her throat, but this time Sarah didn't dodge. She didn't sidestep. Instead, she lunged forward, her body moving faster than she thought possible. And she drove her blade deep into the beast's chest. It let out a deafening scream of pain as Sarah twisted the blade, forcing it deeper. The creature stumbled back, its claws scraping against the arena floor, but Sarah didn't give it a chance to recover. She twisted her body, pulling the blade out and striking again. This time aiming for the beast's heart. The creature collapsed to the floor with a final, guttural growl. The arena was silent. For a long moment, Sarah stood over the creature's lifeless body, her energy blade still gripped tightly in her hand. The cadets who had watched her fight, who had seen her face down the instructor. The other cadets, and now this monster remained motionless. They had witnessed something extraordinary. The instructor finally spoke, his voice as cold and detached as ever. "You've passed. You've survived." Sarah didn't acknowledge him. She didn't need to. The fight was over, and she had won. Her body ached, her wounds burned, but she was alive. And she was stronger than any of them had realized. One by one, the cadets slowly filed out of the arena, their expressions unreadable. Sarah remained standing in the center, her chest heaving, her gaze focused on the creature's body. She had proven herself. She had survived, and now she had earned her place. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. In a universe filled with death and chaos, she wasn't done yet. There would always be another challenge, another fight. But as long as she kept moving forward, she knew one thing for certain: she would never stop surviving.